President Trump heads to China, but should he be bringing up an issue that's probably not on the radar? We're about to have a great episode of the Sean Spicer Show. Let's get into it. All right, guys, good Friday to you. We've made it through the week, and I have a show that I'm excited for. I stumbled upon this issue. We have a lot of big issues because President Trump is going to China next week, and there's a lot of things on that agenda. Iran, critical minerals, the Taiwan Strait, military stuff, trade, all sorts of stuff. But there's an issue that I came upon, best-selling book called Kill to Order. You guys might have heard about this. Jekielek from the Epic Times. Unreal what's going on. And I'm going to guarantee you this. I don't think you're going to hear this story anywhere else unless you read the book. And it is a New York Times bestseller, so maybe you did that. But I'm telling you right now, sit back, relax. You are about to hear something about what China is doing with organs. It's become like a cottage industry. You need a liver, a heart, you can go get it. I'm not kidding. This is insane what is happening there. And it's not even on the radar. If it wasn't for Jan's book, I don't think I'd even know that this thing exists. It was crazy. Anyway, speaking of best-selling books, a big thank you once again for making Trump 2.0 a New York Times bestseller. It's the only time I'll ever say something nice about the New York Times. President Trump obviously wrote the foreword. Super excited. We've got this free event at the Trump Kennedy Center, May 15th, 6 o'clock. It's a Friday. You can come. We got a VIP reception after that on the roof. Larry O'Connor, my buddy who's on the show a lot, he'll be here with us as well. But I'm telling you, it's even if you just want to come to the Trump Kennedy Center for the final time, I'm good with that too. But it is going to be an amazing event. Now we can say it's a best-selling book that you can come to. We got a lot to get to, so this is going to be huge. Without further ado, I want to bring in Jan Jekielek, the author of a really cool new book. He's with the Epic Times. The book is called Kill to Order, and it's about a topic that I don't think is even on anyone's radar. Without further ado, Jan. Jan, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
I'm thrilled to be here.
Okay. I got to tell you, I've had a lot of people on the show over the last couple of years. When I started telling people you were coming on the show, they were like, you wouldn't believe how amazing his book is. And I got to be honest, you and I know that I connected through a mutual friend of ours but Dr. Robert Malone, I was having dinner with him, I don't know, probably 3-4 weeks ago. He says, fine, we're going to have an early dinner because I'm going to Jan's event at the Kennedy Center and I can't miss it. I said, okay. Then I talked to someone else and they're like, have you read this book on China? I mean, it was like all of a sudden, everywhere I turned, somebody said, have you talked to Jan? Have you read his book? And so I suddenly have now gone, oh my, I got to take a deep dive. But for a Friday, we're heading into the weekend and I'm thinking to myself, this is an interesting topic. It made the New York Times bestseller list out of nowhere. I mean, it rocketed. People got excited about your book. And on its face, I was like, so you're going to tell me that people got fired up out of nowhere over a book on organ harvesting in China. What was it like? Just take us back one second. Like, what made you want to write a book about organ harvesting in China?
You know, one of the hero researchers of this whole horrible enterprise calls it an evil yet to be seen on this planet. Okay. And for some reason, I don't know why, I've always been interested in these extreme violations of humanity and how to stop them potentially. That's been a long time interest of mine. And this one, I mean, it just sort of, you know, at one point I was hit over the head by the evidence. But when I started talking to people about it, this is in 2006, people, you know, I'm not kidding you, Scott, like basically, I'm not kidding you, Sean.
I know what you meant.
I was just interviewing a guy named Scott, all right, a Canadian named Scott, about the security relationship. But they would clue out in the middle of the conversation. I mean, I kid you not, okay? I would talk to someone, I would try to explain how this works, how it's a whole different level of organ trafficking that is, you know, kind of difficult to comprehend. And people would mentally, in the middle of the conversation, I'd just see the light go out.
Right.
You know? And so, because it's so crazy, it's so extreme, right? And so coming from that to getting to New York Times bestseller status on this issue, it's not something I really imagined in my wildest dreams. So I'm thrilled with it though, because one of the reasons I did write the book is I feel like our social consciousness has somehow changed, and we're kind of ready to accept that this is real. And that's incredibly important because the subtitle of the book, And the True Nature of America's Biggest Adversary, it's so important that we understand what we're dealing with on the other side. I'm not an isolationist. I want us to engage, but we have to know who we're dealing with. We're dealing with a regime that does this sort of thing and views us in a very particular way.
I want to get to what this is in just a second, right? But here's the thing that for people who are sitting here saying, okay, my eyes are glazing over, I don't know. Like, I just want to give people a sense of what Jan's talking about, okay? When I went to the Amazon page for your book, the #1 review is from Dr. Phil, okay? Which, it was funny, I bumped into Dr. Phil last week. As a matter of fact, I was in LA, but that's pretty cool. But then it goes on, Mike Rowe, Dirty Jobs, like that Mike Rowe. This is, like, Dr. Phil I can get kind of, like he's, it's like you can have a conversation about how this impacts health and wellness. Okay, Mike Rowe. Robert Kiyosaki, the guy who did Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I read that book. Rob Schneider, the comedian that was on Saturday Night Live. Gavin DeBecker. Armstrong Williams. I'm going down the list here. I mean, Peter Schweitzer, okay, I get him because that's what but like, this is an eclectic group of people. This is not a bunch of like China-phobes that are focusing on that or people that are really interested in this niche issue. That's a pretty diverse group of people that, like, you've now gotten the attention of, right? And that's the point of me saying this is Rob Schneider's a comedian, Mike Rowe did Dirty Jobs, Robert Kiyosaki did Rich Dad Poor. I mean, there's no common thread among any of these except for whatever you've touched on now suddenly has the interest of everybody.
The crazy thing about Rob Schneider is, how I figured out that he was interested in this issue? He has a joke about it.
What?
If you can imagine, I know. And so I was watching one day, and the joke, I would butcher it, but the joke is basically that China is the only country in the world where it's healthier for you to drink and smoke all the time, okay? Because they're not going to take your organs. Basically, that's the joke. But the point is, he was telling me, he was talking about this joke. He said most people didn't get it. The first time he got the full-throated sort of laugh was actually when he was doing a fundraiser for Epoch, helping with a fundraiser for Epoch Times, because everybody understood exactly what he was talking about, right?
Okay.
And this is
so let's get to this, right? This, explain what, I mean, for some people they might be watching saying, like, and I'm being serious when I say this, like, when I first thought of organ harvesting, there were these things on Instagram that I would see where there would be a dude in a tub and it would say, I stole, like someone would have written in lipstick, like, I stole your liver or your spleen, call 911, right? And that was the only exposure I've ever really had in terms of this idea of like harvesting an organ. But explain just what is happening in China with, like, how do you define this? What's happening?
So the black market type organ trafficking, that happens, right? The urban myth that you're talking about where someone wakes up on ice with a slit in their body, missing something, that, like, people are actually killed by these black market regimes or, perhaps allowed to survive in some cases. That actually happens. But this is a whole different level. This is a whole different thing. And I'm going to paint a bit of context here, okay? Because you need kind of to understand a few things to see how it all fits together, okay? First of all, how's it done in an ethical way, right? So in America, if you need a new heart, let's say, right? Someone has to have a catastrophic accident. It's typically a car or motorcycle accident. And then they can't be like completely dead because if the circulation stops for too long, those organs start to degrade. So, and then your body rejects them. Okay. So you have to get this very specific type of accident where someone is, kind of ready to be used to give that organ to you. And the ethics team has to decide that person really isn't coming back.
Because and you don't want to be an organ donor, right? I mean, that's why you have on your license, I'm an organ donor. You get in an accident, they look and they go, oh, you've agreed that if you're almost dead, we get to take your organs.
100%. But if you have a decent chance of coming back in any ethical scenario, obviously you don't want to take that organ, right? Because that would kill that person. You don't want to do that either. So, and then on top of that, our bodies reject things which are foreign, including organs, right? So we control for that by matching blood type, matching tissue type, and also the size has to match. The supply here is always a lot less than the demand. Okay, there's desperate people out there. They know they're going to die, but they know there might be an organ out there for them. Okay, and so this is, and they're waiting, right? But, and this is how, the Chinese Communist Party instrumentalizes everything. They use that desperation. I'll get to that in a moment. So that's one piece, okay? A second piece is that China has this huge decades-long history, okay, of creating what are called black classes, okay? Let me just explain what that is. Black class is a group, they say this is the enemy. This group of people is the enemy. For example, in 1949, in the early years, the landowners were one of the first black classes. They wanted to take all of the land of the people that owned land, right, of any significant amount. And so they had to, how do you do that? Well, the population has to be on board. It's not like everybody's just ready to see everyone's land stolen, right? So what they did was they pushed massive dehumanizing propaganda into the system. Okay, they control all the information flows. It's a key feature of communist regimes. They control the information and they demonize these people. They said these people are dangerous. They're evil. They took your land. You deserve it back. Of course, the people that get it back are...
Are they Democrats too?
I'm still hoping there's a lot of Democrats that haven't gone to that far left side. Okay. But that's a perhaps a different discussion, right?
Sorry,
but
I couldn't resist.
This is really important, right? Because if that activates a quirk in our psychology, and leftists all over the world use this method, right? You demonize, dehumanize people. Sean, you've been this propaganda like this has been used against you. I know you know exactly what I'm talking about, right? And it makes, but they do it for a whole class of people, a whole group of people, and then our psychology gets kind of fooled, and it's almost like we start agreeing with kind of bad things being done to these people, or in some cases, in extreme cases, when you really control the entire information ecosystem, even participating. Okay, so this is one piece that's really critical. They've done this, they've honed this over decades, okay? The second part is that you have to have the ability, and the Chinese Communist Party very much does, to incarcerate a huge group of people at will. So they have a massive incarceration system. They have jails, black jails, education, re-education through labor camps, it goes on and on and on, okay? Millions of people capacity. And so these are this dehumanizing rhetoric and this ability to incarcerate a huge group of people is so critical. So, and this is what happens. So this is how they build this kill to order industry, okay? In 1999, they pick a new black class. The dictator of China, his name was Jiang Zemin, decides, I'm going to eradicate, to use the terminology for it, the Falun Gong practitioners in China, okay? Very briefly, Falun Gong was a ancient Qigong system, okay? These slow motion exercises look a bit like Tai Chi. And also truthfulness, compassion, forbearance. These are the core principles. Very popular, okay? But very unusual in how it works. It doesn't have a hierarchy. It doesn't have a roster even. You're not really joining anything. It's kind of living these teachings that makes you a practitioner. There's no worship of the teacher. There's lots of teachings, however, that you can live by. And it's very grassroots, very, very bottom up. And unlike communism, which is the opposite, it's very hierarchical, okay? And this grew basically by word of mouth to 70 to 100 million people doing it. 1 in 13 Chinese were doing this at the end of the 90s.
So okay? It's essentially, wait, so just to be clear, these people are doing like a form of what we would say is like Tai Chi or something, and they chose them to be on this list.
Correct.
For extinction.
Correct. Exactly.
Because the emperor says, I don't like what they're doing, and so like let's designate them as the people that we're going to get rid of.
100%, right? I'll just add, right, there is another purpose of these black classes. It teaches the rest of the population this is what happens when you get on the wrong side of the Communist Party, okay? So there's that dimension too. But Falun Gong becomes the newest black class. They push the massive dehumanizing propaganda through the system, and something unusual happens. Okay, the Falun Gong, for the first time, pretty much at the scale we're talking about, they actually resist being black class. Because being black class, right? You're being re-educated, you're being struggled against, you're being transformed. You have to confess that whatever it was you're doing, like if you're a landowner, you have to confess that owning land is horrible, and actually the party policy is the most brilliant thing ever, right? Like that's it, performatively or actually, you have to do that. So they kind of work on you, but the Falun Gong are not going easily. They're saying that's not true. We're not evil people, right? And at really significant scale, they resist being basically, re-educated. And so they incarcerate a huge amount of them, maybe a million, maybe 2 million. We don't know the numbers. We know that the State Department in '05 said about half of the people in this massive incarceration system of China were Falun Gong. Okay, so basically there's a massive group of people, and here's how they set up this kill to order enterprise. Okay, they start blood typing, tissue typing, and organ scanning these people en masse. So now if I'm this wealthy transplant tourist, okay, I'm loose morals, but I've got 100 grand or 200 grand to spend. I sign that deal with the Chinese hospital, okay? Now, because there's so many people that have been basically their vitals being put into this database, someone already exists. That's that perfect match for me. And then that person can be shipped and killed to order. Okay,
wait,
and that's what happens.
Time out. So these Falun Gong, these people who are doing Tai Chi or whatever, they get labeled blacklisted, right? So they start rounding them up, correct?
Correct.
Okay, we round them up, and then we start kind of like scanning them. This is what your blood type is. This is whatever. Is the
Correct.
purpose at that point to then pair them with somebody who needs their stuff?
So at the very earliest moment, okay, I think they just incarcerated a massive group of people because they were told, the system said from the top, break these people, eradicate these people, but they're not. There was even a rule once they started incarcerating them en masse, an unwritten rule that all Falun Gong deaths in this system would be considered suicides. It basically meant you can torture these people, you can do whatever horrible things to them to break them, and if they die, they die.
Okay.
So that was this very vulnerable group of people that's being set up. And I think that at that point, someone said to themselves, hey, wait a sec. I see this win-win in the twisted, instrumentalized logic of the Communist Party. We do have this priority to grow our transplantation system. And we have this, massive incarcerated group of people that are, by the way, known to be particularly healthy. Hey, win-win. Why don't we use them for this purpose? And that's what happens.
So in other words, we've got all these guys rounded up. We might as well do something with their body and their body parts.
That's exactly right. And so from 2000, there's this massive, basically exponential growth of the organ transplant hospitals. They just start growing like crazy, kind of plateau a bit at the year 2005. And still keep growing a bit. We actually first realized that this was real in 2006. Maybe that actually played a role in slowing that growth of their whole industry. But basically, it'd been happening at a lower level. We knew that they had been killing people for organs even as early as 1998. There was a congressional testimony on that. But the scale really only happens when you have this massive dehumanized group of people incarcerated, that it's kind of easier to use for organs in this way.
Okay, so again, I'm trying to so we've got this group of people in China. We dehumanize them. We say we're going to round them up. And then someone says, hey, wait, since we got these guys, we're probably going to let them die anyway. Let's get their organs, right? So there's your supply. What's the demand?
Well, so to start with, okay, there's this something called the Project 981 in China. That's the Elite Longevity Project. Okay, there's a creepy commercial about it that was one of the pieces of evidence of its existence. Okay, but they claim that people that are in this Elite Longevity Project, a tiny group of Chinese that are super elites, okay, that they live 16 years longer. 72 was the average life expectancy in '08. 88, they say. I don't believe the numbers, but I think it's directionally correct, right? By the way, with any statistics from China, you have to take them with a massive grain of salt, because they have a political purpose Secondarily, they may have something to do with reality. That's a distant second priority, right, when it comes to Chinese statistics. But they've got this project, very self-confessed, to basically make the Chinese super elites live a lot longer. And actually, just our anecdotal view of this is they do actually live quite a lot longer. Some of these top leaders, it's unbelievable how long they were living. So that is kind of the core beneficiary, right? We have examples. For example, one case I know, there was a junior soldier that was killed for organs for a senior a military official. That's one case that we actually know exactly was disclosed by a surgeon. But that was before this massive scaling happened, right? And so there was this kind of thirst because, again, the supply is always a lot less, right, than the demand. Now you have the demand. So the super elites benefit from this. By the way, do you remember this hot mic moment that happened, like maybe in September? It was Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, Kim Jong-un. They're walking in Tiananmen Square, observing a military parade, and they get caught by Chinese Central Television on a hot mic. I don't know if you caught that, but basically what happened there, it was unbelievable because they reveal the whole thing in a way, right? Xi says to Putin, "Hey, when we're 70, we're just babies," right? And both Xi and Putin, I think, are 72 at the time. Putin responds and he says, unbelievably, through continual organ transplantation, perhaps we can achieve immortality, right? Through continual organ transplantation. And then Xi responds, our target is 150 years, or 150 years might be possible. And so, by the way, that's the number for the Elite Longevity Project. In my mind, I'll tell you, this is weird. When you work in this space, right? I knew about the Chinese Elite Longevity Project very well. And I also knew about, of course, the forced organ harvesting, but it didn't occur to me until, as late as last year, exactly, that this is a centerpiece of the Elite Longevity Project.
Right. So I'm sitting there and my liver goes out and I'm one of these elite guys. I call up and I go, hey, I have A-type blood. This is my thing. Can you guys get me a 16-year-old liver or 20-year-old liver or, heart or whatever, right? I mean, they now have this endless supply of organs.
It's crazy. And there's even an anecdote I was sent, again, not too long ago, of this obituary of a very senior Chinese official. And this is really creepy, but stuff like this exists. There's other things of this nature. The obituary says this guy liked to brag about how many organs he had transplanted, right? That's actually written into this. And I didn't quite know what to make of the obituary, but this whole hot mic moment.
They're not hiding it. Jan, they're not hiding it. They're like, yeah, we do it.
I mean, let me put it this way, okay? Broadly speaking, I don't think many Chinese officials are admitting to it. Back in 2015 or 2016, right? They pretended to start, and now keep in mind, okay? There's these massive numbers of transplants coming out of China with no credible organ source for 15 years. Starts in 2000, grows like crazy. 2015, 2016, they finally say, okay, now we've got an organ registry. Okay, now we've got an organ registry and we're no longer using prisoners for organs. We knew that they would tell people that were, getting these organs, some of them, they would tell them, hey, it's a death row prisoner that's being used. But that was there's just a tiny number of death row prisoners compared to the number of actual transplants that were going out. But, and I kid you not, okay, what happens is the researchers look at those numbers from their supposed organ registry, which they had created, and it turns out the numbers are a perfect quadratic equation. They had invented the numbers and not in a particularly elegant way, right? In a way that it was obvious that they were fake. So it's kind of course, they'll never admit to it openly. Like we had researchers in the early years, you would call hospitals and you'd say, hey, can I come and get an organ in 2 weeks? No problem. Can we get Falun Gong organs? No problem, because they're supposedly healthy, right? That's why people would ask a crazy question like that, right? So anyway, but then the moment that we would publicize this type of evidence, right, that would go, like you just couldn't get anyone to say that anymore because it was revealed that there's researchers doing this kind of research, right? This is one of the challenges with this issue. Every time we would expose some new important piece of evidence, they would kind of close off our method of getting that evidence, right? Yeah.
So okay. You know about this. You've written a best-selling book about this. You mentioned congressional testimony. I mean, what is like the reaction of not just the, I guess, the world, quote unquote, but like developed countries, civilized, like, are we like, hey, bad China? Or I mean, I don't know. I'm intrigued now. Like, what, it sounds like this is a pretty open secret.
Well, I'll mention just this one thing, that hot mic moment that I mentioned earlier, right? I think it was an actual hot mic moment, but many Chinese I've spoken with, and they just don't believe that the regime could ever make a mistake like that. Like, think of the heads that would roll with that hot mic moment, right? They think that was a kind of advertising. That's what people have told me, right? Like, hey, like if you have loose morals, come open, we'll work with us. We're open for business, kind of thing.
And does it cost money?
Well, so what I didn't talk about was the transplant tourism. Okay. Not, or at least I hinted at it a little bit earlier. So in the early years, and this, to what I was saying earlier, there were ads online that would advertise 2-week wait times, very short wait times, or even shorter, and the prices for the organs. So we know people have come from Taiwan. We know lots of people have come from South Korea. There was a whole film crew that got evidence with the hidden cameras. They went because there were so many people getting this done from South Korea. So it's more of the transplant tourists are from the area, from the region, but then we know of cases from Germany, cases from the US, cases from all over the place, right? So this is like essentially anyone who has the money, and a heart is a kind of in the range of about 150 grand. Like, that's the kind of the last numbers that I'm aware of. I've seen examples of livers for like 400. It
400
ranges,
grand for a liver,
but kidneys for like 30. So it really depends on the hospital. It depends on, and again, this information has gotten piecemeal. So you'll find out from one hospital, you'll find something, maybe they just had someone who was desperate and wanted to pay anything. I don't know, right? I don't know exactly, but the range has been between, like, on the low end for a kidney, 30, on the high end, I think I saw 400 for a liver, but that wouldn't be the common price. So we estimate now, Ethan Gutman, who I mentioned, I think before, one of these hero researchers of this whole thing, in 2016, he estimated that it's about 60 to 100,000 transplants a year that this industrial kind of killing machine is doing. So, that's pretty significant, about a $9 billion annual industry. That's kind of again, these are very rough numbers, but I believe they're conservative numbers. The whole boundary is conservative, in my opinion.
All right. So first, like, if you're a U.S. citizen and you fly over because you need an organ, is that illegal in any way?
No, not except in 6 states now. They've passed legislation that makes it so that Medicare, Medicaid, and insurance can't pay for it. Makes it illegal for those to pay for those transplants.
Can you imagine that? Submitting that bill?
Well, but this is the thing, like, one of the whistleblowers of this, right? In 2005, he had a patient. This was former head of the Israeli Transplant Association, and his name was Jacob Levy, son of Holocaust survivors. He had a patient that told him one day and said, look, I'm going to China. I'm tired of waiting. I'm in danger. I'm getting it set up in 2 weeks, right? And scheduled, right? And so Jacob said, that's impossible, except the guy went and got it done and came back. Here's my heart. Right. And so we knew, one, that the catastrophic accident that I mentioned earlier was being arranged, so someone's being killed. And we knew that how do we get this 2-week wait time? Well, I've explained to you. And so he actually got some of the first laws in the world passed in Israel, where Israeli insurance, that their healthcare system wouldn't pay for China transplants. And that dried it up. Right. But they take advantage of people's desperation. Right.
Yeah, but you're desperate. Right. But you've also got to be rich. So let's just say, I'm going to give you a 50% deal on that liver, and you're going to get it for 200 grand. I got to be honest with you. Like, I'd be scared. Like, the idea of flying over, I don't know. I mean, I guess what I'm trying to ask you is that there any, like, I don't know. I have this vision in my head of flying over and somebody being like, here's the heart, and it's in a box or something. But, like, they've obviously got a pretty solid track record, or am I asking? I don't know. Maybe not. Like, what's the track record of flying over there and actually getting the heart or the liver or whatever and surviving? Because I would be scared that I'm getting some janky thing put in me that I'm going to die.
Well, so that's an interesting question, and I don't have any specific data, if you will, that I could share with you around that, because a lot, like, it's not like we have, uh, uh, people coming out and admitting in any significant numbers. There's a few, right, that they've gotten this done. Remember, you've had someone killed for an organ, even if you didn't understand it at the time and you learn it later, you're not rushing to confess, right, or something like that. That's so the short answer is I don't know, but a longer answer is that you remember those black market organ rings I was talking about earlier? I was trying to understand, like, how does that actually work? Because what you don't have is this ability to match. The ability to match increases the likelihood of the success dramatically. And then, of course, as they started doing this back in the early 2000s at scale, they learned a lot, right? It's like you practice makes perfect, all of that, right? So my guess is that when it comes to this illicit organ trade, I mean, it's not black market in China. The regime is, and it's under the auspices of the regime. So at best, it's gray market. But I would guess that your likelihood of success in that system is much higher than on the black market, because on the black market you're getting any liver. You're not getting a super magic thing, right? And I think the way this works is it preys on people's desperation, because they're like, I'm dead, right? I'm dead. It's not like they're like, I have a chance here. They're like, I'm done, and my transplant system is not giving me an organ. I'm going to go on the black market and get it done. Of course, again, these are people who are flexible in their morality, right, to be able to do something like that. But on the China side, right, I think the likelihood of it working is actually much higher, because they have that ability to match exactly. And the crazy part about this, Sean, is that no one did anything about this. Really, not much. There was that 2008 law passed in Israel. Now there's laws being passed at the federal level. There's two pieces of legislation in the Senate, all of that. But 2015, 2016, not much really had been done at all. And they added another group of people, the Uyghur Muslims in the northwest of China. They dehumanized them, and they incarcerated 1 million plus of them. And up there, okay, the whole area is run as a police state. It's a strategically important area. Some Americans don't even know our official position, the official U.S. position on what the Chinese Communist Party is doing to the Uyghurs up there is genocide, like active eradication of an entire group of people. That whole area is like a police state. And so they've started blood typing and tissue typing people in their homes. Okay, a significant portion of the entire population. This stuff spreads when it's not held in check. That's the lesson.
Okay, so what is the position of the U.S. government, the Israeli government, the British government? I mean, are people saying this is like you cannot? I mean, are they facing any kind of? I haven't heard outside of your book. I've never heard that this exists. So
right.
Why is it like? Is anyone ringing the alarm saying? I mean, I think this is silly. You can pass a law, but if I go over to China and get a new heart and I get back on the plane, no one's going to know that I got a new heart or a new liver or a new spleen or anything, right? What are we doing to, President Trump's going to China next week. This is not on the agenda, Jan, right? Why are we not?
I'll tell you something interesting. On the new NTD television side, our White House correspondent, Mary Otsu, she actually had a chance to ask the Secretary of State Marco Rubio, about this exact question. The question was something in the vein of, are human rights issues, including forced organ harvesting, Mr. Secretary, I'm paraphrasing, because you actually had a bill about this in the Senate while you were senator, right? So Secretary Rubio, then Senator Rubio, is one of the people who was ringing the bell on this massively. And it was a very good piece of legislation. One of the key things, right, that we haven't done yet is establish in law that this is real. There's voluminous evidence around it. There's a whole tribunal that was held in 2020, gathered all of the evidence together. And I could go a lot on and on about the evidence, but we need to establish in law that it is real, establish whether it's an atrocity under the Elie Wiesel Act, that was part of the act. And also, by sanctioning people that are involved in this, a lot of those Chinese, especially as their economy is kind of slowing down massively, they're very interested in exit strategies, okay? And so people that are involved in this, right, they're going to think twice if they want that exit strategy, for example, to America, right? So there's these things actually have teeth, and then there's the laws that I mentioned that are at the state level. So this stuff actually makes a difference. It makes a pretty significant difference.
But what is the position of the Chinese government that, we do it just like you do? Somebody dies and we try to connect them with a donor, with a recipient, or do they acknowledge that this actually occurs?
No, so what they do, they say this is, I was just looking at, I'm writing a long form piece as we speak, okay? And I was just looking at a letter that was sent to Chris Smith, one of the longest serving congressmen in Congress, amazing guy on a whole, New Jersey, that's right, on a whole bunch of issues, okay? But on China, this guy has been right from 1983 or whatever he first got into. It's astonishing how clearly he understood what the CCP was and how little he was listened to, at least in the early years. So he got an act nearly unanimously passed through the House called the Stop Forced Organ Harvesting Act. And after he did that, he got a note from the Chinese embassy, basically, calling him out, like this is all lies and all this kind of stuff, right? So no, absolutely they don't admit to it, but absolutely it goes on at scale to the best of our knowledge at this point. And we're kind of in this place where, like, I'll give you an example, okay? There's a paper in the American Journal of Transplantation from 3 years ago, I think, maybe 4, titled Execution by Organ Procurement. The authors wanted to assess whether in the Chinese transplant literature, the published Chinese transplant literature, there could be examples of people being killed for organs, right? Because we know it's the standard way it's done there. Is there some sort of legitimate system? We don't know for sure, but certainly the incentives aren't stacked to have this very complicated ethical system when you can kill to order, right? Well, what they found was they looked at 2,000 plus papers. They found that at least 71 instances, and I think this was a very stringent criteria. I think it's actually a lot more, but 71 papers at least showed very clear violations of the dead donor rule, meaning that people were being killed by having their organs removed. They wrote that into the scientific methods, okay, that's so desensitized and so normalized there. But will they ever admit it? Of course they're not going to admit it. This is a crime against humanity, right? Again, we could establish in law that it is, but it's an atrocity. It's one of the most extreme violations of humanity we can imagine.
There have been people, from what I understand and I read in your materials here, that like there are people that have had an organ harvested and then still live.
So it's an astonishing story. And by the way, the first time the mainstream media, it was mostly in the UK, not in the United States, okay, really started writing about this was after this survivor. I never thought we'd ever see a survivor, by the way. Like, I truly never thought it could happen. But there's a guy who is missing part of his liver and part of his lung. And, he was actually rescued to America by Bob Destro, who was the former Assistant Secretary of State for Democracy, Rights, and Labor in the previous Trump administration. And he's lived to tell the tale. He's like, and we scanned him, and yeah, he's missing these organs, and they were taken against his will. And he's around, right? And it's astonishing that he's around. It's kind of a miracle. I've interviewed a number of Holocaust survivors over the years, and their stories are just astonishing. Like, it was sort of like certain death here, but they chose to go this way, right? And then certain death lay over here, and then they went that way. His story is a bit like that. It's not an exact comparison, but it's just very unlikely for someone to be able to survive something like this, given it's so easy to just simply, get rid of the person that's being used, so to speak. I believe my own hypothesis is that they were experimenting on him to see if they could do a partial liver transplant, because that was something that was relatively new at the time when he got harvested. And then I don't know why they took part of his lung. That doesn't make much sense. Maybe they made a mistake. And then somehow when he woke up chained to a gurney, right, he didn't know he'd been harvested, right? He just knew he felt horrible inside, had a 14-inch gash in his side, right? And then just, by God's grace, he made it to America, and actually got some significant press globally, at least, on this issue. Which
can he prove that like, I mean, I don't mean to say like he wasn't in an accident, or like he literally was like, I got abducted and someone took my stuff?
So he was a Falun Gong practitioner that had been incarcerated because he refused to recant or to do with the things they required of him, right? Which is basically allow himself to be re-educated. And what happened was and this is why there's often these types of complications in these cases. So he had swallowed something, right, in protest, right? So what they said, this is one of the very rare cases where they actually responded because they saw how much media was covering this, right, issue, this survivor. And so they said, oh no, we operated on him, but we did it to save his life, okay? But there's no scenario, and this is, kind of asked this question of multiple people who are kind of experts in this area, gastrointestinal medicine and transplantation and so forth. Is there any scenario where you would remove part of someone's liver and part of someone's lung in trying to remove something that's in their gastrointestinal tract? And the answer is no, there is no scenario where that makes any sense whatsoever. So they actually incriminated themselves by admitting to having operated on him it's very interesting because they've never really done that, right? And of course they did it without his consent, right? So that there is actually this one admission that they forced organ harvested someone.
Is China the only place that we know of that does this?
I think it's a unique set of circumstances that allows for it. I don't know how it could really happen elsewhere.
So I mentioned President Trump headed to China next week. Is this something that should be on the radar to say, hey, we're know about it. We're going to pass law. I mean, is it more attention needs to be brought to the issue? What would stop this?
So first of all, Secretary Rubio did answer this question, and he said, of course, and he answered the question sort of broadly, human rights and forced organ harvesting kind of together. He said, of course, we talk about these issues kind of in the right venue, in the right context. I'm paraphrasing here. I don't remember exactly his words, but it was good to hear that, right? But he also clearly didn't want to be specific about what it was, and it didn't sound like there was going to be public talking about this. So, what gets it to stop? I think the various types of legislation that we have and actions that the administration can take could put a serious dent in it. And I'll give you an example, okay? We train some of those surgeons. We can stop training Chinese transplant surgeons, period. Okay? We have financial relationships between universities that do transplantation in China. We have NIH funding. We have hospital partnerships. We provide technologies like ECMO. It's a whole other discussion about what ECMO is. We have all sorts of ways in which we are engaged in the Chinese transplant system. Us disengaging entirely, I mean, this is the most no-brainer thing of anything if you want to talk about decoupling, right? Decouple this, because we don't want to be a party to atrocity, right? We just don't want to be a party to atrocity. So these are things that we can do actively right now.
I mean, honestly, the idea that I can't believe I waited to the end to ask this, because I'm like, the idea that we're training these people, their doctor, that's a no-brainer. Jan, I mean, I'm so excited I stumbled upon this. The book is Killed to Order. I mean, no wonder it's a New York Times bestseller list, because I think my experience is very similar to a lot of your readers. When you find out about it, you're like, I gotta learn more about this. And you've done a phenomenal job breaking down something that most people probably don't even know or could fathom is happening in such an eloquent way. So thank you for being with us. I wish you all the best as you continue to promote this.
Thank you so much. And for those that want to pick up the book, killedtoorder.com, that's a short link to the Amazon link. And I would love it if you picked it up. There's a whole appendix in the back where I talk about exactly what you can do if you want to kind of get involved or do anything, or just read about it.
Awesome. Jan, thanks a lot for being here. All right, guys, thanks for tuning in. I hope you have a great weekend. Make sure you go out there and order Trump 2.0 on Amazon. Keep it on the bestsellers list. Join us in D.C. if you can on that March 15th event at the Trump Kennedy Center. Go to SeanSpicer.com. My latest column is there, plus information on those free events to the Trump Kennedy Center. Have a great weekend. We'll see you back here on Monday with Robert Cahaly of the Trafalgar Group.